I've got a problem with it because I think it was a penalty, but I'd have less of a problem if Michael Oliver had just gone across to the monitor, spent 30 seconds and said, no, I back my decision. We could have debated it and said, well, we think he was wrong. But I've really got an issue with the way they're operating at the moment. I say it every week. But once again, Mike Riley, the head of the PGMOL, has doubled down on it. It's almost like the start of the season when he come out after a few weeks and said, well, we've only made 6 mistakes. Well, we could have doubled that straight away when we rolled out all the video. It's almost like there's a denial at the moment in England about where and how they're getting the decisions and how they're going about getting the decisions. And I tell you what, it's doubly frustrating for everybody.
Let's go out to Don here. This is a critical moment in a critical match. Do City have a fair gripe?
I think it's worth an argument. I think when you look at the decision, you look, as you mentioned before, about the distance involved, I think Pep was probably obviously very, very frustrated. He's been on the end of some bad VAR decisions in the Champions League and obviously in the Premier League. So it's an important period in the game when he set his side up to go to Anfield on the front foot, and they started the game really well. He won't go to Anfield and create as many chances as City did. They were phenomenal for probably 20 minutes of the game. And that was the big call. It's almost, in these sort of games, it's always the small margins. Liverpool had 2 shots and found themselves 2-0 up inside 30 minutes. And it was the call that was probably, leaning towards City getting off to a great start. Would they went on and won the game? We'll never ever know. But I think for Pep and Man City fans, I think it's certainly worth their appeal and worth being frustrated.
I think there was 2 examples in this game, perfect for me, as to why one was and one wasn't. And the one we're arguing about with Alexander-Arnold, he's 8.4 yards away. Now, any professional will tell you that distance is way long enough for you to get your hand out the road. And the perfect example of one that wasn't was the second one, when Sterling is being closed down by Alexander-Arnold perfectly. He's got him side on, he's almost touch tackle, and Sterling hits the ball straight at his hand. It is never a penalty in a million years. And if you want an example of what isn't and what is, then you've got them both in the one game.
Can I be really boring and say,
no,
just as usual, and just say, there was 2 really good teams on that field, put on a bit of a show. Yeah. Liverpool.
That's not what this show is about. That's not what we talk about. What about Pep's behaviour? What about the 2? What about all that?
Don't go spend a week in Seattle and LA and
wow, wait a second.
Telling me what this show's all about.
If it was Mourinho, if it was any of these guys, we'd be hammering them. I mean, come on, Pep's attitude, the sarcastic shake.
How does Pep, seriously, how can Pep complain when the ball has clearly come off one of his players' arms? Yeah, as a coach, if I'm sitting there and I've been told what's happened, I would never in a million years and go and complain because I know exactly what's happened. It's come off my player's arm. You can't. If that comes off his arm, hits Alexander-Arnold and goes in the net, is it going to be allowed? No, it's not. So Gab was talking about common sense earlier. Common sense should be used now, but Pep's 100% wrong on both.
Gab, go ahead.
No, look, I don't want to be the guy who says, well, what about the players' mistakes? But Julian Lawrence flagged this up on the Gab and Jules pod today. I hadn't noticed at the time, but I think it's worth mentioning. When the Alexander-Arnold incident happens, the ball bounces off Alexander-Arnold and it falls right in front of Aguero. It's right at his feet. Now, Aguero, at that point, just starts appealing. He starts doing this and stuff and appealing for the penalty. If Aguero had played the whistle, or if he had remembered that VAR was in effect and VAR was going to decide if it was a penalty, if he had remembered all this, he could have simply squared it 5 yards to his left to where Raheem Sterling was standing unmarked, and Sterling could very well have scored, and we wouldn't be having any of these debates. And I just think, for all the talk out there about preparation and attention to details, here you have a guy who's been a professional footballer since, I think he made his debut at 15 even, and who's been around, and they're so prepared and everything, and VAR and all this stuff, and he forgets one of the most basic things and one of the most crucial moments of the game. And I think that's something that's kind of been lost in this whole thing. Little details like that could have turned this, and we might not even be talking about this.
Kevin De Bruyne, I didn't track back off the back of it. Then you've got Gundogan just lazily and panicking, dinking the ball out to the edge of the box for the first goal from Fabinho. Then you've got the Liverpool counter with the two full-backs switching play, the early cross catching them out, Man City. And then you've got nobody stopping the cross and allowing Jordan Henderson, who did brilliantly, but you've got to stop the cross. They allowed him to put a cross in. And then you've got Kyle Walker, who has not had a good season, not defending the back post properly. All these things are factors too. That's what I'm trying to say. The VAR stuff is important because they're getting it wrong most times at the moment. But still, Liverpool scored some great goals, and City had themselves in the final third on many occasions, but weren't clinical enough. We're just not clinical enough in the final third. Be it Raheem Sterling, be it Sergio Aguero, whoever it was, they were not their normal clinical self.
Don, you agree with what Craig's saying here? City let themselves down?
I wouldn't say they let themselves down. I mean, when you look at the 3 goals, yes, they could have done better. I mean, certainly Kyle Walker for the 3rd goal got himself far too square on. He had no idea that Sadio Mane was behind him, so he wasn't in a good position. I still think, though, when you look at that game again, I've watched it live and I watched it this morning again. I've got to say, City started really well. And when you look at it, the first 20 minutes, they come out the traps well. They put Liverpool under big pressure. But the goals that they allowed to go in were quite cheap goals. The second goal was a sensational ball in from Andy Robertson, Mo Salah's goal. That was a brilliant goal, probably a little bit unstoppable. But they're Liverpool, I mean, Jurgen Klopp said it today or yesterday. He said Liverpool were wild, and that's a term that he uses a lot. When Liverpool play well and they play at their fast, furious pace, they do look wild, but wild means, in Jurgen's language, in his sort of second language, is a good thing because they're very hard to stop. And Jurgen also said it's pointless trying to play Man City at their own game because if you get in a slow tempo game, you get in a pure football game, City probably beat anyone on the planet. They're too good.
When I go and watch the Grand National done the horse race, I don't care how well the horses start.
Yeah, but you've got to take into the...
I'm more interested in how they finish.
Yeah, but you've got to take into the bigger picture, Craig. You've played the game, and we've all played the game where you go to Anfield away from home in one of the biggest games of the season, and Pep delivers a team talk that's going to get your side on the front foot, and you create, 5 or 6 good chances?
You've got to take them.
That's a pretty good start. I know the result wasn't the end result and what they needed, and whether Pep was being sarcastic or not, and he has said it once or twice before, so we'll take that with a little bit of pinch of salt. He did say his players were fantastic.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.